Redditors who have been clinically dead, what did you experience in death, if anything? Story 1. I was dead for 6 minutes. I was laying on the gurney and I was getting colder. Somewhere my body started warming up and everything became really calm and peaceful. I was no longer in pain. All the noise from the ER just went away. It was kind of really enjoyable. I was thinking about my daughter and I was remembering all the things we had done. Slowly, it was just black and nothing. There was no knowledge of anything. I explained it as it was before I was born. Then the worst thing in the world is being revived. I started hearing loud noises and I felt this massive pain. Then there was this nastiest stench ever. The smell was like every dead animal had crawled into my nose. The smell was so bad I started vomiting. I remember the doctors turning me on my side and watching my vomit spray on a nurse. Dying was the most pleasant thing I have ever experienced, and being revived, the worst. Story 2. Not really sure what happened, and it still freaks me out to this day. My daughter was 4 and developed pneumonia. Her breathing would stop in her sleep, so we took her into the emergency room. She was there for a total of 5 days. For the first 3 days, her health kept deteriorating, and on the 3rd day, my girlfriend got a call that her mother had collapsed and was taken to the hospital too. She was without oxygen for 20 minutes and was declared brain dead. That night, my daughter woke up and asked about Grandma. No one had said anything to her or in the room with her. We asked her what she meant. She told us that Grandma came to her in a dream and said, "It's not your time yet. I'll go for you." Immediately the next day, she was almost 100% better. Story 3. Anaphylaxis. Wasn't breathing. I considered all the hallucinations I experienced likely due to a hypoxic episode until I told my mom what I saw. A middle-aged man who wasn't in scrubs, standing still at the end of my bed while all the staff was running around and doing their business. I was having a non-verbal conversation with him and he was telling me to calm down and focus on breathing. He wore a tropical-style button-down shirt, one of those old-school newsboys hats, and had a very pleasant demeanor. Mom showed me a photo of my grandpa that I had never seen before, and it was the same exact guy at the foot of my bed, and he died before I was even born. Story 4. I don't know if this counts, as I don't think I flatlined, but I did have a huge postpartum hemorrhage after my second and last child was born. I was given a general anesthetic before I passed out on my own, but leading up to that was such a surreal experience. As someone has previously mentioned, there is this sense of acceptance of laying back and just going with it. At first, I was scared and panicking, but by the time I was being wheeled into the theater, I was smiling at the midwife and telling her it was going to be okay. I was delirious and euphoric and not scared at all. My vision started to go. At first, it was colored spots, then everything had a gray hue as tunnel vision set in. The sound became muffled, like putting my hands over my ears. The whole time, the general feeling of indifference and no urge to fight it was there. It was so calm, I don't think I ever computed just how lucky I am to be here. During the recovery, though, I felt like crap for weeks and had PTSD. Story 5. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it's triggered by a chemical called salicylate, found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school, she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, an adrenaline shot, until the ambulance got there. Now, obviously, having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school, she was in pretty bad shape already and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses twats, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time, but still nothing. They gave her a second direct injection of adrenaline, and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, has no pulse, nothing. Dead. Dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds, she was clinically dead, and the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you are losing consciousness, you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't mind it. All despite the fact her mother and the paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously just came back to life almost 3 minutes later as they were giving her chest compressions, and the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but to also restart it with a little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still, to this day, she can't differentiate between falling asleep after a long day and dying. Story 6. I know 3 people that have been clinically dead and have come back. What they described as something much different than what people are talking about here. They all said, if you paraphrase, that it feels as if you're just passing out, a feeling of your conscious slowly getting focused into one point in the exact middle of your head, while your limbs lose feeling in a tingling, pleasant way, and then you lose consciousness. One girl said that when she came back into consciousness, she was hallucinating because she had no idea what was going on, and that she started dreaming of something safe, i.e., her mother hugging her in a warm bed. Story 7. I was on loads of morphine, so it's still really hazy, and the fact it happened almost 6 years ago doesn't help my memory, but I'll try to recollect, as accurately as I can, what happened and what I experienced. I had appendicitis, and my foster parents at the time didn't take me to the hospital until 2, almost 3 days after I had burst. I should have been dead well before they took me, even the doctors called it a miracle. Well, I died while waiting for surgery. I had to wait for a pediatric surgeon to come in because no one else felt comfortable performing the surgery on a case this bad with a child this size. Dumbass took me to the adult hospital, not the pediatrics, which was 40 minutes away. I was 14, 5'3", and weighed 75 pounds, soaking wet. So while I was waiting for the surgeon, I was in a room with me, the doctor, my 2 foster parents, and my grandmother, who is an RN. As I said, I was really up and couldn't really focus on much and couldn't really do anything. The monitor I was hooked up to would beep really loudly from time to time, and the intervals between beeps started to decrease rapidly. Turns out I wasn't breathing. I was conscious for the most part, I just kept forgetting to breathe. Doctors had to keep nudging me so I wouldn't sleep. I just remember being pissed at this loud beeping that kept me from enjoying a nice slumber. The doctor had to step out for a second, and my grandmother assured him she could look after me for a second. Unfortunately for her, she was out of her mind with rage at my foster parents. She didn't hold back either. My grandma is normally a sweet Mormon Utahn without a rude bone in her body. Well, I heard quite a few curses then. My point is, she didn't notice I had passed out until the monitor signaled I had flatlined. Now, this is the bit where I died, and is by far the most vivid part of the experience. I remember being capable of thought, but no thoughts were in my head. I can only describe it as being conscious of my spirit, but without a body for my thoughts to be processed. I just kind of existed without feeling, thinking, or being anything. I was floating. Honestly, at the time, it was a great feeling. I don't remember any visions of people, family, places, or anything like that, but I felt something wrap around me and comfort me. Without talking, I was assured I was okay, that there was nothing to be worried about, and at that point, my thoughts returned. I knew at that moment, without knowing how long I'd be able to keep thinking, that I had to go back. I didn't want to, but knowing that the last thing I'd see before I left mortal life was these 2 pieces of human trash who had abused me, neglected me, and treated me like a stain that they didn't want to bother trying to clean up. That did it. I wanted to get back to my body and fix my life so I could go back and live with my biological parents and feel loved again. At that moment, that's all I cared about, and then I sort of willed myself back. Doctors had tried to resuscitate me but had failed. Everyone was shocked when I opened my eyes and saw the tears in my grandma's eyes after thinking she'd lost me. That did it. I fixed my life, reinvented myself, and threw out all my anger, depression, rage, and everything else that put me in Brent and Karen's home. Honestly, the only anger I felt, the burning hatred kind that makes you want to do anything possible to release it, in the last 5-ish years since I moved from their home is when I think about them and how they're still fostering youth in custody. I'm probably pulling the same crap with those kids. I live about an hour away from where they are now, and I have to restrain myself from driving up there, killing those kids, and taking them to the authorities with an explanation of why. The only reason I haven't done that is that I've tried telling the authorities what kind of people they are. I guess the words of a juvenile screw-up don't stack up against the lies from people who have practiced this crap for years. Story 8. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say it's likely the first hit that stopped my heart and the second one that started it. I remember experiencing the darkest dark and the most silent silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change. It could have been hours, it seemed. It was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating and floating towards something that I eventually realized was my body in reality. Upon joining with whatever it was I was floating towards, I became self-aware in my body and heard the electricity making horrible noises and knew I was in danger. Story 9. I was dead for a very short period of time, maybe like 30 seconds to a minute. There's a big misconception about it. It's not like sleeping at all. I'll try to explain. There's always a sort of white noise in the back of my mind. It quiets down when I sleep, but it's still there. I never noticed it before I died, but I do now. I don't want to romanticize death, but when I was out, it was like this perfect nothingness. And nothingness is so hard to imagine normally, but once you experience it and they bring you back, part of you wishes you could have stayed. There are no positive feelings there, obviously, but it takes away everything bad too. All your stress, the nightmares, the troubles, all gone. Just nothing exists. It's beautiful in a way. I'm not suicidal at all and hope to live the rest of a long and happy life, but I'm very much looking forward to a lack of consciousness when I do eventually pass again. And I can honestly say, I don't fear death anymore. Story 10. When I was 15, I was scheduled to do a tilt table test. They lean you up at an angle on a table because I was consistently experiencing dizziness and fainting spells. After about 20 minutes, the doctor tilted the table back and I could feel myself passing out. I got severe tunnel vision and I lost 95% of my eyesight, like looking through a straw, and then I blacked out. I remember hearing the doctor call the code and my father cussing at the doctor that he killed me. I remember hearing a lot of slamming and banging around, which I assume was a crash cart and nurses shoving into this small testing room. I felt a pressure on my chest, like when you have someone standing on your back to crack it, which I found out later was the nurses doing CPR. I saw an array of vivid colors kind of dancing around, forming objects in the dark. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt, just pure 100% peace. No panic, no pain, no sadness, nothing, just bliss. I coded for just under 2 minutes, and as soon as I came to and opened my eyes, I felt seriously angry and hostile. I started ripping off whatever I could get my hands on and yelling at the doctor to get me off the table. Story 11. Not me, but right before my great-grandma passed, she kept trying to explain these vivid colors and smells. She kept saying how beautiful things were, and she was saying it was unlike anything she ever saw. She was an extremely religious woman, and a little while after the colors and smells, she told us he, with a capital H, said we have to say it was okay for her to go. I mean, my whole family was standing around saying goodbye. I vividly remember this even though I was just only 9. And once we all said it was okay, she passed on. Also, the night before, she was talking to herself. We asked her what was going on, and she pointed at the chair across the room and said, "Please don't be rude, I'm having a conversation with her." We were confused and asked about what, and she said the woman was explaining what we were going to do with our futures. So strange, and I'll never know if it was real or what was happening, but it's kind of cool to think it's real. Story 12. I was around 6 or 7 years old, and one day I got rushed to the hospital by my parents because they heard me breathing really loud and hard. The last thing I remembered was the faces of the doctors and nurses above me while I was lying on my back. Then I flatlined. The weirdest, unexplainable thing happened then and there. I suddenly could see the whole scene as a sort of spectator, like I was a floating spirit in that room. I could see myself getting revived, seeing my mom crying and my dad comforting her. Then I saw a white entity shaped like my body falling through the ceiling and slowly, like a leaf in the wind, falling down to eventually land inside my body. And that's when that experience ended. I was put in a medically induced coma and I woke up after some days. I don't remember. I had stuff plugged into me, an IV, a red glowing elastic ring on my finger, etc. Anyway, I later mentioned to the doctors that I saw it all. I saw them using the defibrillators, my parents, etc. No one really believed me and told me that I was probably dreaming and biasing my memories due to watching TV, but I know what I saw. I don't really recall what was the exact cause of my hospitalization, but I know that it started with an asthma attack alongside heart failure. My memories from that time are a mess. I spent a lot of time in hospitals and I've taken heart meds and steroids till I was in my mid-teens. Wish I knew and remembered more, but I never really had it explained to me. I just went along with the doctors, my parents, and medicines. I could have sworn that I saw them preparing the defibrillators just after they did CPR on me for some time. Maybe they used them after I got my pulse back? Sorry if it all sounds like a mess. Maybe I was actually just hallucinating. I remember that while I was in spectator mode, I saw a nurse handing a paper to my mom for her to sign. I later asked what she signed that night, and she was like, "How did you know I signed anything? You were unconscious." It turned out it was some insurance stuff. Also, I have had a heart defect since birth. I don't know the exact name of it, but it has to do something with in my heart not opening or closing properly, which caused me insane stabbing pains in the heart area once in a while. They're gone now, so I'm off my meds. Story 13. I don't share it much, but I've had 4 heart surgeries, and in my first and third one, I coded. You had to be conscious of these surgeries to get your heart to react appropriately. The first time it was just nothingness, black, just nothing. I can't even explain how long it felt like nothingness. And then I remember waking up with them over me saying, "We lost you for a second there. Are you okay?" The second time is the hard one to share. I woke up in a type of subway feeling thing, but everything was white. The subway, the tunnel walls we were speeding through. I didn't have a body per se. It felt like I was on the subway at times, and the times it was like I was just looking out a window at the tunnel wall. It came to a stop, and it was just black nothingness again. And then I heard a voice of a much older man. He said, "Are you ready to go?" And I just had nothing, like I didn't know how to speak. We're going now if you're ready. And something inside me felt so ready to go, like I was a magnet to it, this unknown destination in the black nothingness ahead. I remember finally saying, okay. He said another time with a slightly different tone, we'll be leaving here. Are you ready to go? And finally, something in me snapped, and I remembered I had a life and people I'd leave behind. And my first thought was, I can't leave my girlfriend. I couldn't do that. And my mom and my dad, my puppies, I can't leave any of them. My family, my friends. And I made a decision I couldn't leave. I didn't even have to say it. Once I decided I couldn't leave and I was for sure staying, I woke up and came to consciousness with the medical team all around me. Story 14. One of my old frat brothers was clinically dead for like 40 seconds because of Xanax. He said that he saw himself floating above his body in the hospital room. He said that he could see doctors and nurses working on him and his family in the room. He said he slowly floated above the hospital and towards a light. He said the most peaceful feeling he has ever experienced washed over him. He said it's almost impossible to describe the feeling with our vocabulary. He said it feels like a weight was just lifted off of you. He said he saw some long-gone family in the light, but they told him it wasn't his time. He said he was angry because he felt so good but floated back down to his body. I have no idea if he's telling the truth, but he is a trustworthy friend. He never used drugs again. Story 15. My wife and I discussed this at length. 4 years ago, she died twice in 3 months, needing full resuscitation both times. Both were lengthy rescues. One resuscitation was off and on for nearly 40 minutes. I asked her later, after recovering, if she remembered anything at all during the time she was clinically dead. She remembered nothing. Blackness, no light, no relatives and former pets waiting for her. Nothing, just black. Thankfully, also no pain. She finally passed 18 months ago, and I hope she felt no pain or worry the final time. Story 16. Clinically dead on 2 separate occasions. I didn't experience any visions or light, and I didn't feel anything at all. It was just like a switch was flipped and my existence was just shut off. Coming back, though, was another story. Slowly, I was able to hear the voices of those around me fading in, and they slowly got louder until I was able to open my eyes. And that's it. Nothing spectacular. 1 second you're here, and 1 second you're not. Story 17. I coded after surgery. I remember being able to see and hear everything and understand what was happening, but I couldn't physically feel anything. It was deeply unsettling.